3 years ago, a man in a $5,000 suit walked into the diner where I worked, sat down in my section, and left me a business card instead of a tip. I almost threw it in the trash. I'm glad I didn't. But not for the reason you think. Stick with me, because this story isn't the fairy tale you're expecting. It's messier than that. It's realer than that. And by the end, I think you'll understand why I almost said no to the man everyone would tell you to say yes to. Let me back up. My name's Marin. 3 years ago, I was 26 years old, waiting tables at a place called Rosie's off Route 9, and I was, without exaggeration, one missed shift away from losing my apartment. You might be wondering how a grown woman ends up like that. I ask myself the same thing some nights. I grew up in a small town where the biggest employer was a chicken processing plant. My mom worked there for 18 years until her back gave out. My dad left when I was 7, and I mean really left. No calls, no birthday cards, nothing. So it was just me and Mom, and money was always this thing hovering over our heads like a storm cloud that never quite broke, but never quite cleared either. I was the first person in my family to get into college. Full scholarship, if you can believe that. I studied nursing because I wanted to help people, and honestly, because I wanted a job that would never leave me broke again. Then, in my second year, my mom got sick. Not the kind of sick you bounce back from. The kind that eats your savings, then eats your time, then eats your future. I dropped out to take care of her. I don't regret it. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else. I don't regret it for 1 second. But I need you to understand what that decision cost me, because it's the reason I was standing in a diner 9 years later instead of standing in a hospital wearing scrubs. My mom passed away when I was 23. And when she did, she left me with something I didn't expect, her medical debt. $41,000 of it. I know what you're thinking. That's not supposed to be legal. Debt shouldn't just transfer like that. And technically it wasn't all mine. But when you're grieving and 23 and drowning, you don't always make the smartest decisions. I co-signed things I shouldn't have. I took out loans I didn't understand. I was just trying to keep her comfortable in her last months, and I'd do it again, every time, no question. But it left me buried. So there I was, 26 years old. No degree, because I never went back to finish. No savings. A stack of collection notices I stopped opening because I already knew what they said. And a $9 an hour job plus tips, at a diner where the regulars knew my name better than my own family did anymore. I want to pause here for a second, because I think a lot of you watching this know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling where you're not lazy, you're not making bad choices, you're just behind. And every month you're a little more behind than the month before. If that's you right now, I see you. Keep watching, because this gets worse before it gets better. But it does get better. So, the suit. His name was Julian. Julian Cross, if that name means anything to you, and if you're into business news, it probably does. He came into Rosie's on a Tuesday night, alone, wearing clothes that looked like they cost more than my car. Which, to be fair, my car was a 2009 Corolla with a check engine light that had been on so long I'd basically adopted it as a feature. I didn't recognize him. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't some waitress with dollar signs in my eyes clocking a billionaire walking through the door. To me he was just a tired-looking man in an expensive coat who ordered black coffee and a meatloaf and barely said 10 words. But here's the thing. He came back. The next night. And the night after that. By the 4th night, I asked him, kind of joking, "Don't you have somewhere better to eat?" And he looked up at me, and I remember this so clearly, and he said, "Everywhere else, people know who I am before I open my mouth. Here, nobody cares." That hit me harder than I expected. Because I understood that feeling of wanting to just be a person for 5 minutes. I felt that way every single day, just from a completely different direction. He wanted to escape being somebody. I wanted, more than anything, to become somebody. We started talking more. Not flirting, not at first, just talking. He'd sit at the counter near closing, and I'd wipe down tables, and we'd just talk. About nothing. About everything. He told me about his father, who built the company and then spent 30 years telling Julian he'd never be good enough to run it. I told him about my mom, about nursing school, about the $41,000 sitting on my shoulders like a second spine. I wasn't trying to impress him. Honestly, I think that's why it worked. I wasn't performing. I was just exhausted, and he was the only person who seemed to actually listen when I talked. Then one night, about 2 months in, he asked me to dinner. A real one. Not the diner. I need you to sit with that for a second, because I think it's the most important part of this whole story. I said no to a billionaire asking me to dinner. And it wasn't because I didn't like him. It was because I was terrified. Here's what was going through my head. If I go, and this becomes something, everyone is going to think I did this on purpose. They're going to think I saw a rich man and calculated my way into his life. And worse, some tiny, ugly part of me was scared they'd be right. That I'd start liking him for the wrong reasons without even realizing it. I didn't trust myself. That's the truth. I'd been poor for so long that I didn't know what parts of me were real anymore, and what parts were just hungry. So I said no, and he didn't push. He just nodded, said, "Okay," and left his usual tip. That should have been the end of it. But 2 weeks later, everything fell apart at once, the way it always does, not one thing, but everything. My landlord raised the rent. My car finally died for real this time, transmission completely gone. And Rosie's cut my hours because business was slow. All in the same week. I remember sitting in my apartment, the one I was about to lose, doing math on the back of an envelope at 2 in the morning, and just breaking. Not crying pretty. Ugly, ragged, can't breathe crying. The kind where you're not even sad anymore, you're just tired of being afraid. I want to be honest with you about something. I thought about giving up. Not on life. I don't mean it like that. I mean giving up on trying. Just letting the debt collectors take whatever they were going to take, letting the apartment go, moving back to my hometown and working at the plant like my mom did, and just existing. Turning off the part of me that still wanted more. That's the lowest I've ever been. And then, weirdly, the next night, Julian walked back into the diner. First time in 2 weeks. He must have seen it on my face, because the first thing he said wasn't, "Hi." It was, "What happened?" I almost lied. I almost said nothing, like I always did. But I was too tired to lie anymore. So I told him. All of it. The rent, the car, the hours getting cut, my mom, the debt, everything I'd been carrying alone for 3 years. I didn't cry in front of him. But I cried in my car after, for a long time. Now, here's where I need to correct the story you probably think you're watching. Julian didn't swoop in and pay off my debt. He didn't hand me a check. I want to make that really clear, because that's not what happened, and honestly, if it had happened that way, I don't think I would have said yes to anything that came after. What he did was smaller, and honestly, it meant more. He asked if he could drive me to work until my car got fixed. That's it. Just that. And over those 2 weeks of car rides, something shifted. Not because he was rich. Because he showed up. Every single day, at the same time, without fail. When you've been let down as many times as I had by my dad, by circumstances, by a system that felt built to keep me stuck, consistency starts to look a lot like love before love even shows up. We started dating for real after that. Quietly, carefully. I didn't tell anyone at work for months. Partly because I was scared of what people would say, and partly because I didn't fully believe it myself yet. I'm not going to sit here and tell you the rest was easy, because that would be a lie, and I promised myself I'd tell you the truth in this video. When people found out, and eventually they did, it was ugly. Some of my coworkers stopped talking to me, like I'd betrayed something. Strangers online. Once his family mentioned the relationship, called me a gold digger before they knew a single real thing about me. His side of the family was worse. His father, the same man who spent 30 years telling Julian he wasn't good enough, looked me up and down at our first dinner together and asked me, in front of everyone, "So what exactly do you bring to this family?" I remember my hands shaking under the table. But I looked at him and said, "I bring a man who finally has someone in his corner who isn't after his money." And I meant it. That dinner was brutal. But Julian didn't flinch. He didn't apologize for me. And he didn't apologize to me for his family either. He just stood next to me the whole night, literally and figuratively. And later he told his father that if he ever spoke to me like that again, he wouldn't be welcome at our home. Whatever home that ended up being. That's the turning point of this whole story, if I'm honest. Not the wedding. Not the money. It was that dinner, watching a man choose me, the poor waitress with the mountain of debt and the dead car and the dead mom, over the approval of his entire world. I want to talk about the debt for a second, because I know some of you are wondering about it. Julian never paid it off for me. I paid it off myself, over the following year and a half, with a job he helped me get, not handed to me, helped me get. There's a difference. At a healthcare foundation his company partnered with, doing patient advocacy work. Ironically, close to the nursing path I never got to finish. It paid real money. Enough that for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't drowning. I insisted on paying that debt myself. He offered more than once. I said no more than once. Because I needed to know I could dig myself out. I needed that for me, not for him, not for anyone watching from the outside keeping score. We got married about a year after that dinner with his father. Small wedding. My mom wasn't there, obviously, and that's still the hardest part of all of this. That the person who worked herself into the ground so I could have a better life never got to see me actually get one. I lit a candle for her at the ceremony. I still think that's the moment I cried the hardest that whole day. Not during the vows. During that candle. So where am I now? I'm not going to pretend my life looks anything like it did 3 years ago, because it doesn't. But I want to tell you what actually changed, because I don't think it's what you'd guess. It's not the money, though obviously that helped in practical ways. I won't pretend it didn't. What actually changed is that I stopped being afraid all the time. You don't realize how much of your brain poverty takes up until it's gone. All that space that used to be filled with rent math and debt math and can I afford the doctor math, that space is just mine now. I use it to think about other things. Normal things. It's strange how much of a relief that still is, every single day. I still work. I want to say that clearly, because people assume once you marry money you just stop. I still work at that same foundation, still do patient advocacy, still help families who are drowning the way I was drowning. Some days I sit across from someone doing math on the back of an envelope, and I recognize that exact look on their face, because I used to wear it myself. If there's a lesson in all of this, and I've thought about this a lot, trust me, it's not. Wait for a billionaire to walk into your diner. That's not it at all. Most people won't get that. I almost didn't get it either, and even when I did, I almost said no to it out of fear. The lesson, I think, is this: don't let what you've survived convince you that struggling is just who you are. I spent so many years thinking my whole identity was the girl who's barely holding it together. And when kindness finally showed up in my life, my first instinct was to push it away, because I didn't trust that I deserved it. If you're in a hard season right now, and I mean genuinely hard, not just a bad week, I want you to hear this from someone who's been there. You are allowed to accept help. You are allowed to let someone show up for you consistently, and just believe them. That doesn't make you weak, and it doesn't make you a user. It makes you human. I think about that business card sometimes. The one I almost threw away. Not because it led to a rich husband. I promise you, that's the least interesting part of this story to me now. I think about it because it was the first time in years someone looked at me, exhausted and broke and barely hanging on, and decided I was worth coming back for. You don't need a billionaire to walk into your life for that to happen to you. You just need to stop convincing yourself you don't deserve it when it finally does. If this story meant something to you, I'd genuinely love to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me about a moment in your life when someone showed up for you when you least expected it. I read every single one. And if you want to hear more of my story, including what happened with Julian's father after the wedding, because trust me, that's a whole other video, make sure you're subscribed, because I'm not done telling this yet. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. It wasn't easy to tell, but it felt important to tell it honestly. I'll see you in the next video.